What I'm going to talk about here is something that I call intersecting lives. And the reason why is because, you might think that your life doesn't affect me, and you might think that the person next to you has no real bearing on you, even if you don't even know who that person is. But it's amazing how these lives can come together. So bear with me as I go through this, because I think it's important, and I promised myself that I would do this every year. Back in the early 70s, now I'm as old as you, okay? And here we are, and that's me down there. This is what happens when you get old. I actually started college when I was 17. And like a lot of you guys anyway, you have a lust in your heart for a young lady and everything like that. Well, the school that I was in, which was the predecessor to the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, it was called the Lowell Technological Institute in Lowell, it only had less than 2,500 students altogether, of which there were less than 8 girls. I think there were actually only 6, of which 3 of the girls resided in the biology area. Now, I'm a plastics guy, okay? I'm a plastics guy, biology. I am like the enemy, but I decided that that's where the girls were. So, like you, I was rather shallow. You are. And then, so I decided to go over and take all the biology classes too, which I did. And in the process, they thought either I was crazy or I was a little bit more aggressive than most of the people that were over in the biology area. So they started a biology club and they named me the president. And that would be like having the fox watch the hens for a while. Oh yes, I'll be more than glad to do that. But in the process of doing this cadre of individuals, one of them became my wife. And so, yes, I know, it was success. Oh. Yeah. I tell you what, I still think about that skirt, I don't know about you, and I can see that we have a lot of shallow people over here, but it's nothing like a Catholic girl skirt. You know what I'm talking about? Yes, you do. Okay, so that was this lady amongst 2,500 hormonal type of guys, and there I was, just a short-haired, wimpy little guy. And so, anyway, I was successful. Yes, I was. And we have been married for 40 years. A little less than that, but we've been together for 40 years. I won't go into the details, okay? Now, as we go through this, we recognize that, okay, it's very possible that your spouse could be in this room right now. Okay. Okay, so as we go through this, we recognize, okay, fine, intersecting lives is very, very possible. Now here's a picture of a young fellow that was a contemporary, that is a person going through the school, the 2,500 students at the same time. His name is John Oganowski, and he was a nuclear engineering major at the time. You got to keep in mind that in the time of going to school, if you graduated in 1972, which John did as well as my wife, I actually graduated a little bit earlier. I was in graduate school. I hung around there for a little bit longer to get another degree. But we all would take a lot of the same classes. We would take the same physics classes. We would take the same math classes. It was all fairly universal. It wasn't quite as parsed out as it is here now at Ferris. But John Oganowski, not a personal friend of mine, but someone that was, in my life in terms of classes, etc. So, fine. You think about this. This is 38 years, 40 years, 39 years ago. Long time. So what's the deal? Okay, just keep that on hold for a minute. The fall of 2011, I am teaching a class in this room. And I'm teaching a class that has to do with product management, things like that. And so what I did is I decided to take that class out to the ropes course. If you haven't been out there, it's a lot of fun. And so we went out to the ropes course. And one of the things that we have to do in the ropes course is we have to do a trust. You get up on maybe about a 10-foot area, and then you fall into the hopeful arms of the individuals. You know, this is kind of like the mosh pit, hoping, of course, that everything is going to be okay. Now, this young man right here is Martin Ninch. Now, Martin Ninch was one of the students in the fall of 2001. Now, Martin is forever in my mind, and there's a reason for that. Because I was teaching the class here, and before the class, I had to send a fax off to New York. And when I sent the fax off to New York, it was about 8:30 on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. And so I had to send this fax off because I was going to be taking a group of students to Europe. I come to class, which started at 9 o'clock in this room, and as I'm going through, blah, 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 Martin ends up saying, hey, excuse me, I use the restroom. Okay, fine, go away. And he comes back in, pale as a ghost, and he says, Professor Muccio, a plane crashed into the towers, in the World Trade Towers. And I said, come on, you know, cut it out. That's not even funny. He says, no, go on CNN. So we went on CNN, and from that standpoint, and from the rest of that class, our minds were blown. It just became unrealistic. And so what we were doing as a class, not as a professor and the students and all that sort of stuff, just as human beings, we're just all looking at this. So Martin's stuck in my mind. You know, there are ways that you stick in one professor's mind, and that is if you set a lab on fire, I'll remember you forever. Or if, in fact, you're the most brilliant student in the world, will probably remember you forever also. But in this case, I remember Martin. So the plane crashed. The first plane crashed. And, you know, that entire day was a rather shock. You know, you guys, you know, are kind of moving further and further away in your lives, away from what actually occurred. So, you know, you start to hear these stories, and maybe you remember where you were, maybe not, but I certainly do, and I was in this room. Now, President Cedarberg of the university was, in fact, telling everybody, look, we're going to have classes on the 12th. It's going to happen. What we want you to do, professors, is to go home, you know, chill out a little bit, think about what's happened, come back in, and whatever you have the next day for class, relate that to the 9/11 situation. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, classes, what the heck am I going to talk about, etc. Then, it must have been about 9 o'clock at night, seeing the same thing over and over again. Then all of a sudden, they must have decided that they got some new information, and the news people, at least the TV show that I was watching, the news show that I was watching, drifted on over to one of the family members of the pilot of the first plane. By that time, they realized that it wasn't, obviously, just a random accident. There had been multiple plane crashes. They knew that, in fact, the pilots had been murdered, and in the process, what had happened was it was a terrorist act. So as I'm listening to the news about what's going on, I'm thinking, good God, I seem to know something about the pilot. I went off to my yearbook and found this picture. The pilot of the first plane was my contemporary. I knew him. He wasn't my friend in terms of, you know, let's go out for a beer, but he was a person that was in my world at that time. And, you know, you just stop and pause and you realize, crap, you know, of course, this is what I then told the students when I came in. How did this thing relate to anything that we were teaching in class? Not necessarily any of the topics at hand, but all the way to the first plane, the pilot, the lead pilot that crashed in there, the lead pilot who, they say, had his throat probably slit, but in his last moments of life, flipped on the cabin recorder, which ultimately got destroyed, but ultimately had the transmittance, the last transmittance of what was going on in that airplane. Even though he had died, he had the wherewithal to go ahead, make it so that people in the various towers could hear what was going on, which ultimately led to a quick understanding of what was going on here. These were not random acts. So, you know, you look at that and say, wow, you know, this is a very sobering type of thing. It even looks the same to a certain degree. So he, in the 1970s, he got his degree. He went off to in Vietnam. With a degree, he was able to fly planes, and that's what he did for a living. So a bit of a shock. The epilogue to this is unfortunately not very happy. Martin, the young man that ended up telling me about this, was himself killed in an accident in which now he was operating a piece of equipment, something happened, and as a result, it ended up killing him, which happened, you know, 5 years down the road. But the fact remains is, you know, it seemed as though there was a pall over everything that occurred at that time. You're looking for something that is positive, and, you know, certainly there are many, many, many stories, but try to understand that I was always looking for something that I could relate to students that would be realistic. You know, not just talking about it from the standpoint of, you know, we all have the same experience, but recognize that as you pass through life, the people that you surround yourself with, you might find a friend for life, you might find a spouse. The person next to you might go off and do some great things. The person next to you might be dead in the near future. You never know. You know, life is short. You've heard that so much, and you realize probably, maybe not. You're not immortal. You're gonna die somewhere along the line. You know, I don't want to be a big dampener on everything as far as what's happening here, but we want to recognize some of the important aspects of it. And so what I decided to do is every year, about this time, I share that particular story. So that's all I'm going to do as far as the lecture is concerned, but I certainly hope that maybe that kind of gave you another little insight as to how one man can relate to the 2001 events. So the footnote also to this, kind of the epilogue of the epilogue, I ended up taking the 19 students in October to Europe, which was rather dramatic because at the time nobody thought that we would even fly. But we got all sorts of interesting support from the university, and everybody that we spoke to in Europe wanted to know how we felt, and they wanted to share how they felt about it and let us know exactly what was going on. It was interesting because in many cases, just because we were Americans and we were very close to that 2001, a lot of times the people just gave us free stuff. We got free bus rides, we got free meals, and it was just because we were Americans.